everyone. Welcome to AFCEA Asks, the segment where you ask the questions and we get answers from thought leaders and subject matter experts in our community. And we're super excited today to have Duane Blackburn on with us, who is S&T Policy Analyst for the MITRE Corporation. Thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm very happy to be able to participate in this conversation and honored to be the first one out.
Great. Well, do you want to give a quick introduction and then we'll launch into some of the questions that we received on social media?
Sure thing. So again, I'm Duane Blackburn. I'm an S&T Policy Analyst at the MITRE Corporation, which is a not-for-profit entity that manages multiple FFRDCs for the federal government, as well as works on other projects for the national interest. We have about 8,000 employees that are really diving deep into really hard problems for the national government. And my job is to leverage the insights and data that they've gained and ensure that policymakers can leverage those. Those folks get opinions from all over the place, but what they really need is experience and data. And so that's what we try to provide them. Prior to joining MITRE, I worked for 8 years in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy for both the Bush and Obama administrations. And before that, I was a research and development program manager for Department of Defense, the National Institute of Justice, and the FBI.
And we have some questions that were submitted to us on the AFCEA LinkedIn page. And so the first question comes from Alicia Kelly of the AFCEA Nova chapter. And she asked, how is policymaking evolving to better enable public participation?
Yeah, that is a great question, and we're actually seeing that worldwide. So there's a lot of interest by our citizens that they want to be able to influence the decisions that impact them more often than every couple of years when they are able to do so in the election booth. From a policymaker perspective, enabling that input provides all kinds of different outcomes. It actually enables those outcomes because you're getting different types of perspectives and different types of data that you would not normally have. So that's always beneficial in creating better policy. It does also create the possibility of noise, however, and that's not all data that you receive is appropriate data or accurate data. And so you have to work to weed that out. Within the US specifically, we have for many years had the NPRM process. So as draft regulations are starting to get finalized, they'll get put out and enable the public to comment on those. And I've seen lots of instances where those comments can dramatically shift where those things are happening. Now, over the last couple of presidential administrations, we've also seen a significant increase in them pinging the public for ideas as they're developing those even higher level strategies. So that's voluntary. The NPRM process was mandatory by law, but we've seen the benefit of that and are starting to apply that in these higher level strategies as well. Now, just last week, the International OECD put out a really good paper that goes into a lot of detail on this topic. So I would recommend people read that if they want more depth.
So the next question we have for you comes from Danny Sava of our Tampa St. Pete chapter. And he asked, what happens within the policy domain during the election season, which is obviously very relevant right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the short answer is everyone's really busy. So if you look at the policy cycle within our federal government, it's really based around the elections, which happens every 4 years. And so no matter who wins this election, whether it's Trump gets a second term or we get a different president, there's going to be an awful lot of changes. And one of the first things that happens in the first term of that new presidential cycle is putting out the president's management agenda, as well as other policy documents such as S&T priorities and those types of things. So there's a lot of work that takes place in developing those well in advance of the inauguration date. And that's happening both inside the government as well as outside the government. So policymakers that are in there right now, they're really trying to sprint to the finish, trying to finish the policies that they've been working on for the last couple of years, get those done before they get engulfed with the election season. But while they're doing that normal day job, they also have this extra task that occurs once every 4 years. They're planning for the transition. And this is a legal requirement. They've already started to do that. Actually, last month, they've started to do that. So these policy folks are developing briefing books, planning for the continuity of operations for that transition period, and starting to figure out how they're going to onboard these new political appointees that are coming in, getting them up to speed on the issues, and being able to enable those new political appointees to kind of fine tune what's happening and take ownership of it. So they're extremely busy. On the outside, this is probably the most exciting time for policy influence organizations throughout the 4-year period because it's honestly a world of possibilities. Both campaigns are having to develop talking points at this point. At some point, the transition teams are going to be trying to identify future appointees, and then those new appointees are going to be seeking new policy directions. All of those require inputs from external experts. And so these folks are very, very busy right now, fine-tuning their message, looking for opportunities to get in front of folks and really have those conversations.
Okay, so our next question comes from Brandon Lester of AFCEA Hawaii, and he asks, as biometric data and facial recognition become more prevalent, should the federal government provide technical guidance on how to use this data and properly protect it? And additionally, how should legislation be utilized?
That's a good question. It's honestly a pretty tough question. Uh, I've worked in this field for about 20 years, and frankly, something needs to be done. We've had a lot of advancement of the technologies, and our privacy policies and laws really haven't been updated in generations. So we need to do something. If you look at face recognition overall, it can develop and provide extremely beneficial outcomes. But in the wrong hands, it can produce also some very negative results. The bigger concern, honestly, is for those that don't know what they're doing, it's going to produce gibberish that you have to deal with, and that's all bad. So just looking at that, yeah, we have to develop some type of new policy. Now, whether or not that's at a best practice level, federal legislation, whatnot, the role of government there, that really gets into a political domain, so I'm going to skip that. But what really concerns me more so, and really have to solve before we can even get into some of those extra steps, is that we have a pretty massive fundamental issue that's really impacting all of those options right now. And that's that we're really having two conversations about the topic right now. One by the public and one by people that actually have experience dealing with the data. And the difference between these two conversations is vast, and we need to fix that. The consensus amongst those conversations is that we do want good policy. But good policy means that it's evidence-driven and equitable and outcome-focused. And the problem really right now is that face recognition is pretty darn difficult to understand, and for the most part, we're not really listening to people with experience, and that's been problematic. Like I said, I've been working on this for about 20 years, and it's been confusing to me why that's the case for this technology more so than others. And I've started to come to some realization that honestly, that's how our mind works. If you think back and looking into some psychology studies, we're persuaded, each of us are persuaded most by big fears, surveillance and privacy obviously being fairly big fears. The second thing we're most persuaded by is our sense of our own identity. Well, face recognition hits both of those things. Then you add on top of that confirmation bias. So it's natural for our brains to to take in new information and to view that in ways that it supports our existing opinions. That's again, it's a natural tendency. We all do that. And then finally, there's a theory called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where we're most confident in a subject when we know the least about it. Sounds weird, but as we start to learn about something, we think we get it. And then as we learn more about it, we realize, okay, I didn't know all the nuances. And that's really what's happening here with face recognition. All of those things are really combined uh, to produce these issues, because this technology is easy to grasp, but exceptionally difficult and costly to understand in any detail. And really what's happening on that public conversation side is we're ending up with all kinds of weird and wild stuff out there. A couple of examples. We often see summaries of government reports that provide analyses of the report itself. That report warns that analysis would be incorrect, but we're seeing that happen anyway. We're seeing a lot of references of other technologies that are kind of similar to face recognition, but those technologies and their issues being called face recognition, and that really clouding the conversation a lot. And then we're also seeing all kinds of evidence of poorly managed implementations of these technologies by people that aren't expert in it, and people taking the issues that come about because of that and showcasing it as being emblematic of the entire community. And all of these things are happening a lot. When I talk with people in this community, they're actually amazed because the vast majority of news articles, opinion pieces, and even on some of the policy recommendations that we see includes false information. And that's been very problematic, and it's leading to bad ideas and even worse policy decisions. I mean, to be honest, there are pieces of legislation out there federal, state, local levels to ban the technology overall, and they're basing that on an incorrect information and misleading assessments. So that's bad. For, and again, but it's a natural thing that we have to overcome, but it's going to be difficult to overcome that because this topic, for many of our citizens, has become an emotion-driven issue. And what we've seen throughout history, all kinds of different technologies, when that happens, facts matter less. The emotion overcomes the facts. And that's really what we have to overcome as a federal policy community. It's difficult to do so, but we have to do that if we're going to be able to craft policies that is actually fair and equitable. And then once we kind of get through all of those stages and everyone really understands the technology properly and what the issues actually are, then you can start to tackle them in the most appropriate manner, whether that being the recommendations or diving in with the legislation as the person asked.
Okay, so for our final question today, it comes from Clinton Austin, also from our Tampa chapter, and he wanted to know, what is the plan for the FedID event for 2020?
It's going to be exciting. For those that don't know, FedID, the Federal Identity Forum, is the government's own conference. It's been an annual event every year dating back to the Clinton administration. It's led by an interagency planning committee, and then we partner with AFCEA to actually host the event. Being the government's conference, it's not driven by attendance or anything like that to trying to make money. It's really focused on trying to help the government fill its needs for information exchange and guidance from the private sector on how to proceed with their identity programs. So every year, the conference is a little bit different. The common theme, again, being that we focus on whatever the government's primary needs are for that year. For this year, because of the transition coming up, we were really focused on trying to use this conference to set the stage for what does this federal identity community need to do over the next 4 years. And we're about 2/3 of the way developing those plans when COVID-19 hit. So that's obviously making us shift gears a little bit. We're no longer going to be able to host FedID as a physical environment. We're transitioning to an online environment for that. Because of that, we're going to get a lot more attendees that have less experience. So it's not going to be as much experts talking to experts. There's going to be a lot of that, but it's also going to be experts explaining these issues to folks that are new to the community. And we're extremely excited about that opportunity. The conference itself, we always focus on trying to push and ensure that we have public-private interactions. And we're going to continue to do that. In many cases, this annual event is the primary means for feds to get out of their cubicles and actually talk in a non-constrained environment with the private sector. And so we're going to try, we're working to identify ways to do that in an online forum. So it is not just going to be multiple days of watching a talking head for hours at a time. So there will be a lot of interaction with FedID. Looking at the agenda specifically, it is going to be, well, first off, it's going to be September 8th through 11th, again, online. September 8th being a Tuesday, we're going to focus that day on the normal, what are agencies working on, what are they concerned about, just giving those updates and talking about those from an agency perspective. For Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the remainder of the conference, we're going to shift gears and really be looking at things from a holistic perspective. So breaking down those barriers across different federal agencies, as well as the barriers that are up there between the federal government, industry, academia, and the private sector, and trying to work on the biggest problems together. So Wednesday, we're going to focus on government-to-government identity issues. On Thursday, we'll focus on government-to-citizen issues, which includes industry and academia. And then Friday, we're going to focus on some of the more security and law enforcement aspects of identity. But again, all of these things are really going to be focused on breaking down those barriers, trying to identify where we stand as a community, where we need to get to, and developing a notional plan on how we're going to collaborate and meet those objectives over the next few years.
Thank you so much, Duane, for being here for our first AFCEA Asks segment. We really appreciate your insight on all the topics that were submitted today.
It's been my pleasure, and I look forward to participating in the future ones as someone submitting the questions. Thank you again.
Stay tuned on social media. Follow AFCEA on LinkedIn for future segments of AFCEA Asks to get your questions answered, and check out FedID to join us for this great event this year. Thanks, everyone.